What up, Coordination? How you doing? On the pod today, we have Daniel Kelleher, who is VP Engineering at Civic, which is a privacy-preserving Web3 identity layer aiming to build a more convenient, secure, and equitable future with digital identities. Was really excited to talk to Daniel about Civic because this is a thesis that I have about regenerative Web3 is that with identity, then we're going to have more positive sum games through repeat interactions with individuals who can identify each other. And so, because we're going to be able to identify who we're playing the positive sum games with, we're going to be able to build more positive sum economies. And that's how we create a more regenerative crypto economic internet. So really fun to talk to Daniel. I was a VP engineering CTO before I got into Web3. So I really just deeply appreciate people who can go really deep on the technology, and that knowledge allows them to see empirically and from first principles what is possible in the design space around them. So the technologist in me really liked nerding out on this episode with Daniel, who is a VP engineering at Civic and really knows his stuff. So we talk in this episode about Civic Pass, Civic Me, which are two products that Civic is launching around identity. We talk about soulbound tokens, verifiable credentials, DIDs. We talk about Sybil Resistance. We talk about just many different use cases for identity and what our respective visions are for rolling out identity. And at the end, we compare and contrast Gitcoin Passport and the Civic ecosystem and talk about how we're all climbing the network effect together of building a more identity-based Web3 that people can opt into in a responsible way. And I think that it's just a really fun episode if you're into digital identity. So like I said, I think digital identity creates a more regenerative crypto economic internet. If you believe in that thesis, then this episode is for you. Without further ado, I give you Daniel from the Civic team. Enjoy.
Working in Web3 is awesome, but working outside of the typical W-2 employee structure is a deal breaker for so many. OPOLIS is helping the self-sovereign worker focus on what they do best, their work. Tax time is coming up. OPOLIS helps professionalize your business by helping you form an entity, generate proof of employment through pay stubs, and receive a W-2 at the end of the tax year. Are you self-employed and forced to spend money on expensive healthcare insurance with limited coverage? OPOLIS leverages group buying power through a community employment co-op, helping you save 20 to 50% on high-quality, affordable healthcare options through Cigna. And finally, OPOLIS's member owners share in OPOLIS's success and profits based on their work token holdings. You must be authorized to work inside the United States in select Canadian provinces to receive OPOLIS's benefits. Book a 30-minute free consultation with OPOLIS's experts and join OPOLIS by March 31st, 2023 to get 1,000 work and 1,000 bank tokens. Go to connect.opolis.co/bankless to get started. And if you're going to ETH Denver, make sure to stop by the OPOLIS booth or attend their Future of Work Summit hosted by OPOLIS. The Glow dollar is a new stablecoin with a very special property. As the market cap of Glow goes up, extreme poverty goes down. Glow is a dollar-backed, non-profit stablecoin that creates basic income for people living in extreme poverty. Glow is basically the same business model as USDC, with yield-generating treasuries on one side and a stablecoin on Ethereum on the other. But instead of being a for-profit company, Glow is a non-profit that donates 100% of all yields from the Glow Reserve to GiveDirectly's basic income program. GiveDirectly is a charity that gives people money, no strings attached, to people living in poverty, and is a charity that Vitalik has previously donated to and supported in the past. With Glow, you can reduce poverty just by holding a stablecoin. Glow is launching in early 2023, and you can join the waitlist at glowdollar.org/greenpill. That's glodollar.org/greenpill.
What's up, Daniel?
Hey, Kevin, how's it going?
Pretty good. I am excited to talk about identity and Civic with you. So take us down the deep end. What are y'all working on?
Oh yeah, well, so thanks for having me on, first of all. So Civic, we've actually been around for a while. We're kind of OGs in crypto and identity on Web3. But we've been working most recently on two things. One's called Civic Pass, which is like, I guess, at the crossroads between soulbound tokens and verifiable credentials. It's a kind of an access control mechanism for smart contracts based on identity. And we're looking forward to bringing that out onto a number of chains in Q1 of 2023. We're currently native on Solana, but we're bringing it out on the EVM chains in the next couple of months. And the other thing is Civic Me, which is like your Web3 identity portal where you can go and look at your identity, manage it, share it, and show off your favorite NFTs and even chat to people through your wallet, all safely encrypted and so on. So we're really looking forward to adding features to Civic Me and to sharing that and with the rest of the Web3 community.
Got it. What is Civic Pass and Civic Me built on top of? Are we using DIDs, verifiable credentials, soulbound tokens, something else?
That's right. So it's all based on DIDs. So I think your audience are pretty familiar with the concept of DIDs, but just like the 30-second um, refresher, I guess. DIDs are decentralized identifiers, and they're like I guess you like just think of them as any other identifier, like an email address or like a Twitter handle and that sort of thing. But the big difference is that it is self-provisioned, and you own it. You provision it to yourself. You don't have to request that somebody ascribes it to you. Therefore, there's nobody who can take it away from you. And it is usually anchored in some decentralized storage, which basically means you can mutate it. It's mutable. You can change it over time. You can add, for example, different keys, and you use those keys to like prove ownership of
Mm.
the ID and make
What
changes.
what decentralized storage solution does Civic use?
So we use Solana for that. It's not really a
Mm.
decentralized storage, right? It's a
On
blockchain,
chain.
but
Yeah. Yep.
it is important for this because it has a consensus mechanism. So you don't need to have a storage mechanism that has a consensus mechanism, but it's quite useful to have it. So if you have that for your storage layer of DIDs, then you can add keys to it. You can revoke keys. You can add what are called services, which are basically like endpoints that let you discover information about somebody, find out their credentials, which we can get to next, even send them messages. So we host that all on Solana. It's small amounts of data with a lot of importance on access control and consensus, which is why it makes sense to store it there.
Got it. Anything else to say about the tech before we talk about the use cases?
Oh, I mean, I could go all day on the tech, but let's not go too deep too early. The other thing I wanted to point out, because you mentioned it a minute ago, was verifiable credentials. So yeah, the Civic Pass mechanism is kind of backed by verifiable credentials. So
Mm.
again, the refresher on that is these are basically the Web3 version of KYC and that sort of thing, where in the non-Web3 world, this information, you send it to a third party, and they keep it and do whatever they want with it, and you don't really have any control over it. Verifiable credentials they kind of democratize and decentralize that model. Essentially, a credential or a claim is just one person, one DID, saying something about another DID, and then that's signed by the what's called the issuer of the
Mm.
credential, and usually sent to the subject of the credential to store, and then that subject can send it out to whoever they like. Um, and that there's more to it than that, but that's the basis of Civic Pass, and then we add kind of what is now being called a soulbound token layer on top of that.
Right. Well, it's interesting to me. As verifiable credentials get stored on chain, do they sort of approach what an NFT or a soulbound token is?
They could do if
In
you're
some way.
Yeah, they could do if you're not careful about it. Um, so so I just want to stress the verifiable credentials themselves don't get stored on chain, but they get stored in a
Oh,
storage layer that the user effectively controls
got
themselves.
it.
But
Got it.
they're
I just inferred. I'm sorry, that was my mistake. I just inferred because the DIDs were stored on Solana that
yeah,
maybe the verifiable credentials were too.
it's
Okay.
easy to infer that. So yeah, the DID basically says who has ownership of that identity, and then it will point to a file store that contains the verifiable credentials. So that if you want to share your, I know, residential address with me, you just share with me your DID. I can look up your file store from there, and then I can make a request for the credential that contains your residential address, and you can then approve or deny that request. That's essentially how it works.
Okay. Got it. Yeah. I'm curious. Where you see this all going. Basically, what does Civic Pass unlock for the user and for ecosystems that implement us? Like, take us over that horizon.
Yeah, well, I guess there's two aspects. There's the kind of peer-to-peer aspect where you're sharing credentials with each other in order to establish things like proof of humanity, right? I'm talking to a real person and not a bot. I'm not sure I would necessarily be able to tell the difference these days with GPT-3 and so on. Um, Sybil Resistance, which I'd love to talk about later as well,
Mm.
and and maybe things like proof of age, which are important in a lot of use cases as well. But then there's the Civic Pass aspect, where these credentials then get in some form or another tokenized. This is where the soulbound token aspect comes in. Unlock a lot of powerful use cases in the smart contract world. So one of the ones that I'm most interested in is quadratic voting on DAOs, where you need to have some form of Sybil Resistance and to avoid sock puppets. We also use it for bot resistance during high-profile NFT drops. And you also have on the horizon all the regulatory possibilities, where DeFi is essentially controlled. You effectively can only interact with DeFi if you are not in certain jurisdictions, in certain OFAC sanctioned countries, and so on. There's a huge, I guess, risk there, and that all of DeFi will basically be kind of, I don't know, held back. It's already being held back through the absence of this kind of identity layer. And that's what the Civic Pass does. It basically integrates with these smart contracts to provide these sort of checks on chain.
Yeah. Which of these use cases are you seeing the most traction in right now?
I mean, purely by numbers, the NFT minting, because
Right. Makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah. But that the pass we use for that is like I started talking about credentials by describing the KYC use case, but that's like the furthest extreme of the kind of like heavy-handedness of the kind of credentials that we provide. On the other extreme is the bot resistance case, which is literally just you fill in a captcha. The important thing is then that the fact that you filled in a captcha correctly is registered on chain as like this effectively soulbound NFT, and you present that NFT to the smart contract that's minting the tokens. So it's by the way, that's sort of thing. That's one of the reasons why we've been spending a lot of time on Solana, because this idea of every single captcha, and we're talking about thousands over a period of a couple of seconds, really, in these busy mints. The fact that this will be registered on chain as an NFT, kind of a disposable soulbound token, is it would be super expensive on other chains, most other chains anyway.
Yeah, that's sort of an interesting use case. Maybe it makes sense to dive in on some of these use cases, but before I do that, I want to come up for air and state why I'm so interested in decentralized identity. And that's the GreenPilled podcast and the Regen crypto movement is all about creating more regenerative internet. An internet where you can get rewarded for working on public goods, where we have more positive sum interactions with each other. And sort of one of my sort of first principles ideas about identity is that when we have decentralized identity, that enables more repeat interactions with people, and positive sum games, because you can see through the dark forest and you can see who you're interacting with, or at least in hopefully what we think is a privacy preserving identity thing. You can see certain attributes of people that you're interacting with, and that
Right.
enables all sorts of new types of interactions that we don't have when you have to treat every user as, or I guess every wallet as, the same as every other wallet. So for me, there's a connection point between identity technologies and being able to have repeat interactions with mutual win-wins and positive sum games, and this regenerative crypto internet that we want to build. And so I just wanted to say out loud the reason why I'm connecting Regen Crypto to identity before we dive in on any of those use cases. But if you have any feedback on that, I'd be open to hear it before we go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, my feedback is that it is, in my view, the correct way to view it, and it is actually one of the ways that I find is the most convincing, because there are obviously there's a world of different people that use Web3, but there's two kind of archetypes that I find meeting a lot. One is like the purely anon, I am just my
Yeah.
wallet person, and those people tend to want to be treated like just any other wallet, and they want to treat other people. It's more a financial layer, really, for that group. And then there's the people who see like the huge possibilities of Web3 as a social layer, as a way of meeting and exceeding the expectations already set by Web2. And those people are already, the first thing they say to me is, it's obvious that you need identity to be not just in the mix, but a pillar, an important pillar of the next generation Web3, in a way that is, as you say, privacy preserving, in a way that does give you the power and freedom and control over your identity, the ability to choose what information you share with whom, and to revoke that trust at any time. And one of the things I've been thinking about, we may want to talk about it as well later, is how reputation fits into all of this, because it seems to me
Mm,
like once you've cracked identity, that's kind of reputation is kind of level two of
yeah.
how do you actually provide some kind of meaningful structure around these repeat interactions beyond
Mhm.
just I recognize this person and I trust them
Just
because I see them in Discord channels a lot or whatever.
just for the sake of the audience, many of whom are probably not thinking about decentralized identity and reputation for most of their days. What is the difference between identity and reputation?
Well, I mean, identity is effectively your uh, it doesn't even have to be associated with your real world self or any real world attributes like how old you are or where you live, but it is this idea that you might have a number of wallets on a number of chains and you interact in a number of ways and you synthesize that up into one or more identities that you may or may then not choose to add real world aspects to. So I'm logging in as Daniel Kelleher and I'm interacting with other people and I want them to see my real name, or I'm logging in as my on-chain online avatar and I want them to see that. It's beyond the wallet level. But it doesn't associate at that layer anyway any sense of this person is trustworthy, or this organization is trustworthy, or anything like that. So reputation would come along when you start to think about um, divestments or payments from DAOs. If you do a lot of work in one organization, does that ascribe you some kind of global reputation, or does it ascribe you a local reputation to that DAO or that area? A lot of people just want to kind of solve this problem so that they can provide different voting power in DAOs. It goes beyond DAOs as well, though. You might imagine uh, under collateralized loans in the non in traditional finance, you are given different uh, rates depending on your reputation, effectively, depending on your credit score and so on. What is the Web3 version of that? Do we want a Web3 version of that? Probably we want a totally different paradigm. But if you can spin up multiple wallets and you can basically wipe the slate clean at any point, that's also an issue. So it is inextricably linked with identity for that reason.
Got it. Yeah, one thing that's sort of interesting for me as we go from what I guess what I would in my real life think about identity, not real life, but non-digital life. And in my digital life, what I think about identity is just how many different vectors there are of it in Web3. It felt like in Web2 there was my Facebook Connect, and then I would, connect out to all these different sites, and it would probably share too much about me, and that would be that. But within Web3, it feels like identity is more of a n-dimensional vector where I might use like my Gitcoin passport for one use case, and I might use my Civic Pass for another set of use cases. There, I may even have multiple persistent pseudonymous identities that all accrue reputation with each other, depending on what I'm trying to do. So it just kind of gets interesting how multidimensional identity gets in this space.
And we should let it get that way as well. It's one of the powers of Web3. But what you also want to do is attract, the users who are not familiar with the Web3 space and its powers. So what we're doing in Civic Me, for example, is you connect a wallet and that gives you that connects you with your DID. But you could connect a second wallet and have a second identity. You can link those two wallets together under the same identity, or you can have multiple identities. We want to make sure that it feels like a familiar space for people who are not who are not as kind of familiar, or like who don't think about this from day to day, as you said, but also not curtail the power and the freedom of the user.
Right. Well, I'd love to dive into some use cases of what you can do with this. I know that we've talked about NFT stuff. We've talked about Sybil Resistance. We've talked about a few different things. What's most exciting for you to jump in on?
Yeah, I want to talk about two things. I want to talk a bit more about Sybil Resistance, especially when it comes to DAOs and voting. Uh, and I also want to talk about maybe uh, the less obvious use cases for the idea of a DID, which is about key management and making sure that Web3 is as safe a place to store your information and your funds as like a traditional bank and traditional file storage. because I think that's also one of these kind of unsung powers of DIDs, especially mutable ones. So you can choose, Kevin, which one do you want to dive into first?
Well, let's start there because I can riff on Sybil Resistance for for quite a while. So let's go in reverse
That's
order
fair
through
enough.
them.
Yeah. Yeah. So what there are kind of two different flavors of DIDs in the market these days. There's immutable and mutable ones, I guess, is the way you can describe it. The immutable ones are typically write only, or like write once. You might create them once and then they can't be changed, or more frequently these days they're just derived from key material. So um, the typically a did is derived from a key. So you can, by presenting the key or by signing something, you can prove you own it. That's a really powerful feature of a did. But you can add multiple keys to dids, and they get stored in what's called a did document. But because the on-chain did document has gone a little bit out of fashion, you're left with either having like off-chain dids, like web stored in some Web2 storage, like GitHub or something like that, or having on-chain but immutable dids. And by immutable dids, I mean you literally can't add a second key, you can't revoke a key, you can't do anything that the kind of the DID standard allows you to do. And the reason why they went out of fashion is because on-chain dids were kind of slow and expensive on like things like Ethereum, on Bitcoin, and so on. But they were, that was the original idea behind dids. Like the did spec or the did concept and blockchains, smart contract blockchains, developed roughly around the same time. And the did standard that we use, which is on Solana, I think kind of gets you back to the original principle of the dids, of being able to add multiple keys and revoke keys. And there's a couple of interesting things that come out of that, which I think have a huge benefit for onboarding people who are not kind of native to crypto and to tech. In other words, they're not necessarily going to be very good or willing to have good private key hygiene to keep hold of their keys. One of them is social recovery, and another one is like trust accounts and things like that. And a third one I will talk about is account abstraction. I think that's the kind of the most interesting one from my perspective.
Yeah. So it seems like those things are pretty important because if we're going to be storing our reputation in these documents, then there's going to be need there's going to need to be some way of managing which reputation is active and getting access to it in a social recovery kind of way. The managing your identity and managing your wallet are just two slightly separate things, and it seems like it's important to have account abstraction and that sort of social
Yeah,
recovery in the
you,
identity piece.
you shouldn't lose your identity if you lose your access to your wallet. That's the fundamental. And that's where you can have, for example, a social recovery key on your DID that will, under certain circumstances, allow you to recover your identity. Not recover your private key. It's not a key sharding system or anything like that. It's a layer of abstraction above that, where you can recover your identity by having a new key added to it. And then a lot of the work that we're doing at Civic, on Civic Me and so on, and this is one of the things that we've been focusing on since the very start, although the tech layer has changed over the years, has been making your identity and your Web3 experience in general more safe and more secure by avoiding that need to kind of tie everything to a single wallet. But let me actually add to that, like this idea of account abstraction, and because we have this kind of prototype out at the moment called Cryptid, which is an account abstraction, kind of you could call it an execution layer on top of an identity, on top of a DID. So it's like Gnosis Safe, but it's controlled by a DID, and you can add middlewares to it to add constraints to what, like you can have spending limits added to it, you can have multi-sigs attached to it, you can have, like I said, a social recovery layer attached to it, even have things potentially in the future like subscriptions. So you have like direct debits that can draw a certain amount from your account based on what the constraints that you add at the DID layer. I think there's lots of potential there that has been as yet almost completely unutilized by the space.
Yeah, it seems so. Anything else to say about the tech before we dive in on I think Sybil Resistance?
Well, I want people to try it out. Like I said, we're going onto multiple chains for Civic Me and Civic Pass in Q1. So by the time this airs, you might well be able to try it out if you don't have a Solana wallet. If you do, then you can try it out right now. So the best place to start on that is just to go to civic.me and connect your wallet and start having fun.
Got it. So civic.me, we'll have a link to that in the show notes.
Cool.
Alrighty. Well, I think that there's probably a lot of fruit for us to pick in talking about Sybil Resistance. So let's go there.
Hmm.
You want to talk about how Civic Pass and Civic Me help you manage Sybil Resistance? Maybe we
Sure.
can start there, and then I can sprinkle a little bit of what I know about Gitcoin Passport, and we can compare and contrast.
Yeah, I like Gitcoin Passport a lot. So there's kind of a few ways you can do Sybil Resistance. The we have the first version that we've got is a kind of a biometrics based one. So we have a face scan which checks for uniqueness, and then it will issue a pass on chain that associates that kind of biometrics with a particular wallet, so that you can't associate the same biometrics with a different wallet. It doesn't store any of the information, but it kind of distills your biometric information, your face, into a single point, and then it does comparisons against other points that it's stored. So it's a kind of almost like a hash function. You can't reverse it, and so on. The other ways of doing civil resistance protection. I know that Gitcoin Passport synthesizes a lot of these together. Um, are things that we're contemplating adding later. For example, as kind of social graph based models as well. Also ties in with reputation and so on. But our kind of out the door use case, or out the door kind of version of this, is the biometrics one. And what I like about it is that it's there are a few people doing kind of biometrics based Sybil Resistance, but this is kind of in your browser. If you go to a DApp that uses it, then it just basically brings up a button, adds a button to that DApp that lets click and lets you scan your face. You sign a transaction, and then it will add the token to your wallet. It's very very quick and very low overhead in terms of integrating with DApps.
So it seems like primarily. Also, we did an episode with Professor Brian Ford, who's an academic who's been studying Sybil Resistance.
Yeah, he's great.
Um,
I know
Yeah,
him.
and for 17 years he's been studying it. Actually, it's 18 now that we're in
Mhm.
2023. And he talks about Sybil Resistance. There being four sources of Sybil Resistance that you have to connect an actual human to the computer system. And he talks about using KYC, which is nation state documents.
Mm.
Um, he talks about using biometrics, which is like the WorldCoin stuff, but
Yeah,
also it looks like with the facial recognition stuff you're doing.
we'd be in that
There's
category,
web
right? Yeah.
there's web of trust, which is I've met Daniel, he's a real human. And then
Yeah.
there's presence based, which is you're literally right in front of me, I know that you're a real person,
Yeah.
kind of stuff. And so what I heard, putting that frame on how you're solving civil resistance, I heard that since you're doing the sort of like webcam uniqueness stuff, that you're starting with biometrics, but then there's going to be a way to like roll in web of trust from there. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And I think I see this as kind of a spectrum anyway. So um, you're never, I mean, maybe with the absence of the presence base, you're never going to get full 100% confidence of Sybil Resistance, but different layers. And this is a very good example of where I think Gitcoin Passport does it really well, where you collect these stamps and they give you a certain confidence level. Um, I think that you want to allow the end user to have a choice of different ways of improving themselves. Some people might be fine with the biometric scan. Some people won't. Some people might want to leverage their web of trust. Some people won't. So all of these things will contribute to an overall Sybil resistance score. And we're starting at fairly high end of confidence with the biometric scan. But there are lots of different options in between.
Right. I'm wondering, so the passport architecture, as far as I understand it, I've disaffiliated from Gitcoin, but I still follow it, I still use it, I still care about civil resistance. Is basically verifiable credentials stored on the ceramic network that the user self-sovereign can manage through passport.gitcoin.co. And then there's another layer that is a scoring service where basically I can say, okay, my Civic Pass is worth X amount of civil resistance, my bread ID is worth Y, my world coin is worth Z. together their X plus Y plus Z. Um, and so there's a scoring service that dApps can integrate in, and they can say, okay, I've got X plus Y plus Z of Sybil Resistance on this user, and just with a couple lines of code, the services can get those scores. And there's this forkability thing where if you think Gitcoin's governance is full of shit on the scoring, you can fork it out, and maybe you think it's X plus Y minus Z or something, or to the coefficient of something. And so like there's this forkability and modularity between the storage layer, and then there's the scoring layer, and then there's the DApp layer that integrates with it. And I'm wondering if there's an equivalent in the Civic Pass ecosystem of some sort of scoring layer or way of adding up the biometric and the the web of trust stuff that
Yeah.
you're going to build in the future.
There is. So first of all, as soon as we start issuing these passes on Ethereum, I want to be integrating with Gitcoin Passport. I think that's a really good example of kind of Lego bricks, kind of that are consistently reinforcing each other's usability. So let's do that. I know I don't need to be talking to you for that. I'll talk to the Gitcoin team. But so the equivalent to amalgamating different signals in the Civic Pass ecosystem would be something that we call derived passes. So, by the way, this Civic Pass ecosystem, as you say, is based on what's called the Gateway Protocol, which is run by Identity.com, which is kind of open source sister company that we work closely with. So anyone can issue a pass. They don't have to ask Civic's permission. They're not called Civic passes. They just issue passes, and they all work together. And so then you have this extra smart contract on top called the derived pass contract. And the input to that is a number of passes. All these passes are effectively SBTs. And the output is then some synthesis pass. So let's say you as a dApp have a specific recipe. You want, A times X plus B times Y plus C times Z. You create a derived pass that takes those three coefficients, takes those three passes, and then spits out your kind of bespoke pass. And that's the one that you use to gate access to your dApp with, or that's the one that you use to give. And now we're coming towards the kind of the boundary again, reputation, positive or negative to your users.
Right. So it's a deterministic algorithm that, given a few inputs, draws a curve between them and creates one output that is like kind of a new pass built on the old passes.
Exactly.
It reminds me in a way of how Shamir's secret sharing works, which is I've actually not. I don't know if I'm articulate to explain that, but it reminds me a little bit of like cryptographic operations. The way you said that those three things are deterministically computing the output.
Yeah, although I say it's simpler than that, and the cool thing about it is it's all happening on chain, so it's very kind of you can almost think of it as well as like kind of step up authentication. So if you imagine like the decentralized version of an exchange, or that you have like spending limits, or you have withdrawal limits, and you get past one and it will give you certain access. You get past two on top of that, it will give you additional access, and so on.
That's cool. Well, I think that Sybil Resistance is just a core money Lego for building more Regen Web3. If we can go from one token, one vote DAOs to one human, one vote DAOs, and I just think that that's a key thing for building more democratic Web3. And if we want to get the early majority, late majority into Web3, the most of humanity, their financial lives is not their bags, it's not their investments, it's not their it's not capital, it's labor, and it's being involved in their community, and it's building stuff for each other, and it's community oriented. Web3, I think, is a way that we can onboard the masses. And so I just think that this is a huge area of experimentation, and it's cool to see 1,000 experiments blossom. I hope that in the next market cycle we start to see this really become a trend. Last market cycle felt like it was about DeFi and NFTs. What would have to be true for more democratic use cases, more mainstream use cases of Web3 to be the lead of the next cycle?
I agree. I think that the regenerative movement is a really a good draw to other, like, let's assume we've exhausted the potential pool of people that would come into crypto in order to make a quick buck, in order to speculate. Let's say that everyone who's that way inclined has already done that. How do we draw the next bunch of people? I think the regenerative movement, the ability to have uh, um, fair, decentralized coordination in order to actually enact real positive change, societal change, um, uh, comes through the refi and the regenerative movement, and it would shock people who are coming in for that reason, like to find themselves interacting with anonymous wallet addresses and not having a clue who they are, and not having any way to establish those layers of trust that you need in order to really make a difference for people's lives on the ground. So I think that that's why it also really encourages me to see such a blossom of identity and related um, organizations and projects in the space. And I would add to that saying that we all really need to think, as we do, about integration, about collaboration, making sure that credentials issued by Civic work on Gitcoin Passport, likewise, and that we can really start to benefit from each other's perspectives rather than compete and so on.
Yeah, totally. And I love the pluralism involved in that. The idea that Gitcoin Passport and Civic Pass can be integrated with each other, and the Sybil Resistance you get in one of these ecosystems can be ported, or at least used in the other, and vice versa, is just huge. I think for building. Well, I really think that this is the key point that I see is the network effects of all of these tools in Web3 are really important, because the reason the Web2 giants are so insurmountable right now is because they have the network effects of more users are on Facebook, therefore more people use Facebook Connect, therefore more people integrate Facebook Connect, therefore more users on Facebook, and it just spins like that. But
Yeah.
with Web3, you almost have this thing where like there's more people on Disco and Gitcoin Passport and Civic Pass that are integrating that with signing in Ethereum, and signing with Ethereum as an open standard creates more dApps that can use this stuff, which means more users
Yeah.
use Civic Pass and Gitcoin Passport and Disco, and like we spin the network effects together. And I actually think that's really important, like David and Goliath way of fighting the Web2 giants there.
Yeah, yeah. It has to be a refreshing alternative. That the people are so used to the idea of lock-in now, like having a different friend group on one social media network and on another. And the kind of antidote to that is to go on to, even without realizing you're going into specifically the Web3 domain, just having your identity be portable across these different applications without you really having to do anything. There's an argument for, uh, again, I guess this is kind of the lunar solar punk this discrepancy as well. It's like, should that be by default? Should it just be you go to a second app and it's like, oh, it knows who I am already and it knows who the people I'm talking to are? Or should it be more, so that would be more the solar punk kind of everything's open, everything's great and wonderful? Or should it be more the lunar punk, assume nothing about this person but give them the option to connect their identities in order to give them a richer experience if they want it?
Mhm. Yeah, I'm just really excited to get that flywheel spinning of more users, more dApps, more use cases, more users, more dApps, so that it just kind of it spins from there. But I'm also a little bit terrified. I gave this talk at DevCon about how Sybil Resistance is this infinite game between the people who want to build utility into Sybil resistant mechanisms, and the attackers who want to siphon off that utility by making up new identities. And it's almost this red team, blue team. This is red team, blue team is this thing in cybersecurity where you have the blue team, which is defending a system, and the red team, which is attacking the system. And I think that we need to have the blue team needs to have a good, immutable, decentralized sovereignty and privacy perspective. Uh, Protecting way of defending against the red team before we can responsibly start to inflate this economy of Sybil resistant apps. And that's the thing that I think I think that we're still trying to figure out in 2023. You know, it depends on your verification mechanism. I think what the
Mm.
surface area is for attacks, but I think with things like Chat GPT-3, it changes the way we use like captchas to verify humanity, and it just feels like there's going to be this ever moving line between how you designate a human from a bot. I'm not exactly sure how we create a sustainable defense against the red team with the blue team yet, but it's great to see all these experiments blossom. So yeah, I don't know if you have any comments on that, but that's where I've spent a lot of my headspace the last 9 months.
Well, me too. I mean, yeah, you want to find a way of not making it an arms race. I guess that's what I mean by the infinite game, right? You want to find a way to make it regenerative rather than just like the more time you spend, the fewer returns you get. I mean, we were deep in the coal face of that first couple of months, 2022, when
Yeah,
there was, again, like I said, we were working a lot on Solana, and there was a insane explosion of bots on Solana, of NFT drops on Solana, and the thing is, on the downside of low fees is that it's infinitesimally cheap to spin up a bunch of
yeah,
bots and attack us. And we were
yeah,
being attacked. You know, we were providing this service for NFTs, and we were literally being attacked. And we'd be like looking at the data the following day and going, okay, do we tweak our model this for this? Do we spend a week building this new layer, this new component in order to block this particular type of bot? Or is it worthwhile us doing that compared to building the next layer of protection, which turned out to be the uniqueness pass, and then putting more focus on the next layer bit above that, which would be the kind of, as you say, nation state KYC identity document. And what we've come down with it has to be some kind of spectrum where you kind of, as a project, as a DApp, as a Web3 organization, you choose what layer you're comfortable with. But I wouldn't say we've totally solved the problem that you're talking about, which is trying to
yeah,
avoid the arms race effect, because wherever there's incentive,
yeah.
there's going to be people trying to game it.
Well, I do have hope that I've actually got a slightly different scope, which is not solving the infinite game, but at least addressing the infinite game. And the way I think about this is that I hear Vitalik talk about proof of stake insofar as, you've got $100 billion economy in Ethereum, and the way
Mm.
that you protect that, the consensus layer, is that you have to stake ETH, and then you can get slashed if you do anything that causes a fault on the network. Um, and so basically what Vitalik and the proof of stake researchers have done is they've engineered a system that's much cheaper to defend than it is to attack.
Yeah,
And so crypto economically, statistically, over time, attackers are going to lose money, and so that wards them off from doing it. And so when it comes to the red team blue team game that we're playing with Sybil Resistance, that's the question that I keep landing on: is what's the way to make it much cheaper to defend this system than it is to attack the system? And I think that that's kind of the holy grail of a responsible way to inflate this Sybil resistant economy that we're trying to build. I have no doubt that there will be people who are irresponsibly inflating the Sybil resistant ecosystems, but that at least seems to be where I think the Gitcoin ecosystem is.
I think that's the right way to do it. And I think if you can make it exponentially more expensive to attack than to defend, then that's probably a good pragmatic solution. I think Brian Ford, you were talking about earlier, does point out that no matter what you do, you're effectively just setting a cost of forgery. You're basically setting a cost at which it's prohibitive, and that will ward away people, but it doesn't solve the problem. But I think there's still, in the space we are right now, that's the most pragmatic way of solving that problem, or at least partially solving it.
Well, I mean, I could talk about Civil Resistance for hours, but we are coming up on time here, so we got 5 minutes left. Is there anything I didn't ask that you want to talk about, or what should we spend the last 5 minutes on?
And two things. First of all, when it comes to identity, I do want to encourage people to get in touch with us. Not just if you're interested in any of the things that I've been talking about, but also in general. I really believe that the identity is a matter of where you need a pluralism of opinions. There is a tendency in our space for engineers to philosophize and talk about problems as if we kind of have all the solutions. And I really think that we need to invite more voices into the space. So get in touch with us on Twitter at Civic Key. I'm at Dan B. Kelleher. And I really want to hear more of people's opinions about whether we should be solving these problems or other problems, on how we should be solving them. That's the first thing. The second thing is I just wanted to really quickly talk about another project of mine that I'm currently interested in. It's not really so much to do with identity. It's called Sunrise Stake, and it's a kind of a volunteer pro bono project which is redirecting stake yield to climate projects. I'm also doing that on Solana right now. There's also a company called Spirals that's doing that on other chains. And I'm really excited. It's been largely through your work, Kevin, but other people in the space. I've been really excited by the possibilities of refi and regenerative economics on Web3. This is my non-identity attempt to get involved there. So just wanted to mention it as well.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot. I think that that's so neat. I will have a link to your website, Sunrise Stake, in the show notes here. But I'm really encouraged by this pattern of hackers who, in their day job, are learning the technologies associated with regenerative crypto economics and are taking those skills and are building social impact ventures nights and weekends and trying to get them off the ground because the people who are going to traverse the design space fast are going to be the ones that have the skills to build the technology that can make it happen. They're also going to see the opportunities before everyone else. You can cut through the fog of war when you understand the tech, but then taking that and then applying it to create impact vectors, I think that there's going to be a lot of fruit there. And it's the kind of thing where it's like you just couldn't engineer that. Like you like I could set up like you could just like hire people to build impact vectors or like impact projects and give them like decent budgets, and it wouldn't have the same heart and soul as people who are really pouring like know the tech and are in it for the tech and are in it for the movement and are like organically bottoming up these ideas out of what they're building and out of their hearts and out of their minds. And I think that we're going to see, like, this is my prediction for the next cycle, is that we're going to see like half a dozen to a dozen ventures that start that way with just people being civic hackers, and then they grow into web scale projects, especially if we get good at figuring out a way of sustainably funding these impact projects. But yeah,
So
TLDR, excited about Sunrise Stake, but also the whole movement of builders building stuff like that.
So yeah, that's true, and the sustainably funding side is is basically what we're trying to do at Sunrise, which is like there's this
Yeah.
faucet that's opened with stake rewards, and the majority of people don't actually stake their their funds that are lying around. So this is a way of kind of seamlessly rerouting that into regen projects on Web3.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, yeah, these regen funding, the regen funding problem, I kind of break down into where is their sources of funding, then how can you legitimately allocate them to the best projects that are using that funding. And so that's an interesting and promising thing. So
Quadratic voting with identity is a good start for that.
yeah, totally. Especially if the actors who are doing the quadratic voting are well versed on which projects are the good ones.
Yeah.
So sunrisestake.com is where you can go check that out. And then if people want to get involved in Civic, I've got civic.com here, and then civic.me, I think, is another URL that you mentioned.
Yep. Civic.com, civic.me is your profile. So that's where you can go to try out the tech, and then engage with us on Twitter at CivicKey.
Okay. And then how about you? Where can people find you online personally?
Also Twitter, Dan B. Kelleher.
Great. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate your efforts in creating more regenerative crypto economic internet, and I will see you on the internet.
Likewise, Kevin. Thanks very much for having me on.
Peace and love.